Can you hear me okay in the back? Great. Perfect. Thank you for that introduction. So today we're going to be talking about phones and VoIP and security. A little bit of hacking, a little bit of fun. Okay, as far as what we're going to be covering today, before I get started, I want to kind of do a quick disclaimer, right? A lot of stuff we're going to be discussing today can be used for good and bad. Hopefully it will be beneficial to those that want to use it for good, but I've had some of my coworkers that have been threatened to sue if not sued before, so here's the disclaimer right there. All right, as was explained, I've been doing security for quite some time in both mostly consulting, some operations, but mostly consulting. And as I go from one company to another, I observe certain trends, and VoIP security or insecurity is one of the things I want to talk about today. I run a small consultancy called Security Aim, and I'm a community instructor for SANS Sec 542. Shameless plug, we have a class coming up here in June. Anybody who's interested to learn about web application security and ethical hacking, you can check it out on sans.org website. I run a WASP chapter. I've been doing it for about 7-8 years now. And if you've never heard about OWASP is Open Web Application Security Project, right? So it's a great resource for somebody that's learning about web, learning about security, and I need some guidance there because a lot of great resource on that site. There's also utahsec.org. UtahSec is the organization that we kind of kicked off here to try to combine security-minded professionals together. We have monthly meetings, and you can check it out at utahsec.org. So a little bit about me. So here's the agenda for today, right? So first we'll talk about why do we need to secure VoIP? Why is it that, is it with any technology, you get out new technology that's kind of flashy and useful and beneficial cost savings. Then after some time, you will try to, you find out there's some security concerns with that technology. It kind of is hot for a while, but then it kind of falls off something else comes up and something else takes its place. So that's kind of why I want to talk about VoIP, because I feel like it kind of fell off the radar a little bit, and I'm passionate about that. So we'll talk about how is enterprise exposed. So we want to focus this on enterprise, on maybe public sector as well, mostly private sector for some of the examples. And then as far as how do you secure it? How do you prevent somebody from doing something like VoIP, VLAN hopping and getting into VoIP VLAN and getting to that voice data? How do you actually secure it? Now, some of the recommendations are generic for any vendor, and then if you want to get really into nitty and gritty, you got to get more specific to the vendor, because every vendor is going to have some little bit different capabilities. So for this talk, I decided to go with the most common vendor that we see as we do assessments, and that's Cisco. Cisco is the vendor that we normally use, Cisco Unified Communications, so that's why some of the recommendations will be from that vendor. But the concept should apply to any vendor out there. It shouldn't be vendor specific. And we'll talk about the implementation itself, infrastructure, and we'll talk about phones and what can you do with phones and some of the settings there. And we'll wrap it all up at the end there. All right, so just make sure everybody's on the same page as far as VoIP is concerned. All right, so you got your voice that's going over data network. The great benefit there is obviously cost savings, and that's kind of how it got kicked off. And anybody here works for a company and does not use VoIP, they're just still, so most of us out here kind of, most of the enterprises that we come across, there's going to be VoIP on the network, and that's what they'll be using. All right, oops. All right, now the security concerns with VoIP kind of stem from the fact that you take voice that traditionally has been done in one environment and take it to a data network. So it kind of inherits some of the issues from the data network that we talked about, that we'll be talking about more in detail. But the fact that some of the establishment of communication is not very well designed from a security standpoint. And how do you know that whatever device is on the network is a device that is advertising to be that device? How do you prevent spoofing and those kind of attacks? Now, is it something we should be worrying about? Is it something worth securing? Right? So here's a couple examples. There's an attack on the hospital ER. It was an extortion attack. So it was the threat was that if you don't pay a certain amount of money, we'll shut down your voice network. And the threat was ignored. As a result, the phone, ER system completely went dead, right? So we have seen this done in the wild. I mean, this stemmed into 911 call centers, something critical infrastructure, critical functionality, and relies on VoIP quite heavily. And if it's not protected properly, then obviously can be abused. The public safety agencies are just as vulnerable, and then of course businesses kind of stems into that area as well. Will rely on the voice. Are your phone lines is critical part of your business? That's a good question to ask. I know for line of business assignment, for example, email is a king. Right? If your email is down and customers can't, you're not going to be able to respond in sufficient amount of time, that's a concern. Voice, if you're, customers expect you to be online 24/7 and you're not answering your phones, then they're going to go to competitor, right? So obviously it is worth something securing. Now, if you go into the government area, and here's an example of how the data is being discussed is kind of sensitive, right? So these trends we've seen is government officials or somebody important will have a conversation, and there's something in that conversation that's sensitive. Somebody else decides to eavesdrop on it or record it and then post on YouTube for the whole world to see. And there was an example here where the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs was speaking to U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, and somebody's dropping that conversation, posted on YouTube, and officially U.S. had to apologize because in that conversation there was some things said about not just a country, but pretty much the whole European Union that wasn't very pleasant. So some of the conversation that we have, we expect to be private. We really want to be private, otherwise it can have a large impact. And in the private sector, with a lot of government regulations, they're centered on securing data, ensuring the data of our customers, the data of our patrons, data of our citizens is protected. So you have PII type information goes on over VoIP lines. You have credit card data. When somebody is collecting a credit card information goes on your conversations are recorded a lot of times for different reasons. And you can have intellectual property, competitive data. So, we talk about things that are important to us, to our business, and to, somebody can act on that data in a certain way. So I've been doing research on this area for a bit, and been posting information online and on social media and so forth. And I see a lot of requests for abuse of that functionality. The reason for this information to be made public is so that people are aware of it and they can act accordingly. So here's an example of emails that we get at our company. I got one here from Russian Federation, and they said, "Hey, we want to hack some phones. Price is irrelevant," right? So for somebody out there, VoIP data or phone calls, conversations are important to the extent that they'll pay whatever amount you're willing to do it for. And now, as far as implementations of VoIP implementations out there, as I mentioned, to get this to great detail, you got to get vendor specific a little bit, because every vendor will have a little bit different functionality, different options that they're offering. And here we're going to be talking a little bit about misconfigurations. All right, so everybody knows security is important, so vendors by now have been pushed to the extent of offering those capabilities. They might cost a little bit extra, but they're offering it. Now, if you spend a certain amount of money out of your budget to buy a VoIP solution that has those capabilities, and you do not turn those capabilities on, or you don't configure them, your return on investment just, is not there anymore, right? You're not taking advantage of the capabilities. So you come to an enterprise and you see, latest and greatest hardware, latest and greatest software, then you look how it's configured, and it's not even using the capabilities that are available in it. So we'll talk about how to enable those capabilities and how to make it so that our voice data is protected. Now, is it external or is it internal? Right? Well, some people will argue that, hey, this is my phones in my office. Who's really in my internal network? The whole barrier between external and internal is really, really vague. It's kind of disseminating more and more. If you use your internal network and you use it as your weakest link, as we know, right? Then for somebody from the outside to get an internal network, all they have to do is to abuse the weakest link, which is your users. So that barrier, yeah, it's my internal network, and I have hardened outside and soft inside, really hasn't played too well for us. And as far as specific for, like, let's take Cisco implementation, right? We see customers taking Cisco phones home to have their employees work from home and get VoIP calls there. Right now, so you have a piece of internal type infrastructure, right? Because you got to be able to communicate with your VoIP internal infrastructure, your call manager, all your networking gear on the inside, but you're from home, right? So that VPN, and the fun thing is that on those phones you have pretty much straight right into your internal network. So how is that protected? How is that secured? How is it that somebody steals your phone and they can't use that avenue of connection to your network for abuse, right? We don't want somebody to have that back door into your internal network. Now, who uses Cisco phones, right? So we have it in corporate offices. I see it around as I go from customer to customer. We see it in hospitals, banks, power plants. Something not as sensitive. And obviously Office Dwight, he uses it as well. Right, so it's obviously everywhere. It was a joke about power plants not being sensitive, by the way. Who else uses Cisco phones? The president does. On this picture, though, he's not actually using the Cisco phone, but it's on his desk. So he's used it as well. Now, the concept with VoIP is that you segregate your data from your voice traffic, right? So we see VLANs being used quite a bit. Mostly it's done from quality of service perspective, right? So you want to have your VLAN for sending your voice traffic, and then you have your data VLAN where you don't have as high of requirements for quality of service. So, but VLANs, right? It's a virtual LAN. We're getting really comfortable with the virtual now. Now we have virtual. Private and virtual kind of goes in the same sense with the cloud as well. And we kind of forget about the fact that virtual is not the same as physical segregation, right? So we'll see that typically sometimes there's no filtering. So you have your VLAN, and we get comfortable with the concept that it's VLAN and security barrier. We don't provide any ACLs, any kind of filtering in between. Then it's not really offering that segregation, right? And somebody can get from one VLAN to another. So how do you do it? How do you do it at home? Well, here's some examples. You can do it on the Windows operating system. You gotta install some additional software for that. But here's an example of how you need to find out what VLAN ID is. And you can do that quite easily with CDP broadcast. You just see it on the wire. It's not hidden really well from that. Otherwise, you can see it on the phone. You can go through the settings on the phone. You get your VLAN. Now, how do you join that VLAN? Here's an example of all you do. You just say, hey, for this interface, I want to be able to talk on this VLAN. There's no filtering. Now you are on the voice VLAN. Yeah. Now you just like a phone. Now you just like a call manager. Now you can intercept that traffic and be on that segment. Now on Linux, so you got to have 802.1q VLAN implementation. It's not hard to get. And then you can similarly just say, hey, I want to be able to configure my interface to be on this VLAN. And here's commands there And then as long as they support the HTTP, you just ask for the HTTP address, bam, you're able to talk on something that's considered you know, separate LAN, separate network. On OS X, it's even easier. All you have to do is just go to System Preferences, go to Network, choose the Manage Virtual Interfaces, and add a VLAN. And then just get your HTTP configured, and off you go. So it's not very complex, right? Every operating system pretty much, well, the ones that I mentioned here, will have a capability to do that. Yet, when you come to network and you talk to network administrators and you ask them, well, tell me about your VoIP and your data, how you're segregating it. People on the oh, it's totally separate, totally different. But then you look under the hood, and I know some people that do, you know, hotel type environments where they try to get from you know, phone to in the hotel, from phone to the internal network of the hotels, and it's still common there as well. Now, you know, after that, once you join the VLAN, your regular man-in-the-middle are poisoning, the common stuff that's been around there for quite some time with data networks. And you know, some of the tools, here's just an example of being able to decode that traffic and actually play it with a media player. So how do we address this? So we got to restrict access between one VLAN to another. So using, you know, stateful firewalls, ACLs, prevent the traffic from going from one to another. Prevent users from just being to connect. The reason why we see a lot of times they'll open that ability to connect is, for example, if they need to manage network, VoIP network, and they bring in consultants from the outside, it's a little bit overhead. Right now you need to provide them that access. Now you get the, you know, let them get to that data. It's convenient when it's wide open, right? They can just come in, plug in, and get it fixed, get it done in a scenario where it needs to be updated, needs to be corrected. But at the same time, we want to make sure that somebody that's not authorized can't do that as well. And you know, let's take a public area, right? So in the lobby, a lot of times they will, and I'm sure they covered in some of the social engineering talks. If you try to get on internal network, obviously you know, tailgate somebody, get on the inside, and you got to find a public area, right? So your conference rooms, your lobbies, a lot of times will be a public area. So now, how do you prevent phones from being tampered with, right? How do you prevent people from unplugging the phone, unplugging their laptop, and then trying to attack your voice network? Now, you know, we've seen that the phone's being locked, right? So you got to get to that physical security, right? They'll lock the phone so that way, if anybody unplugs the phone, try to plug a laptop or another device into the network, physically they wouldn't be able to do it. Disabling the port, if the VoIP phone is unplugged, anytime you see that happening, there's something going on, and you just, you know, turn it off, make it dead. And as far as, you know, 802.1x implementations have been talked about, there's some limitations with those, so we recommend people looking at something like MACSAC, is defined in IEEE standard, and you know, looking at some of the ways of hardening more. It really depends what your threat model is, or your attacker, right? Because you have attackers that are coming after you as you are a target of opportunity, or if they're really going after you because of something you do, because of some data you have. Now, how do you know which phones to target, right? So you're on the internal network, say somebody was trying to eavesdrop a conversation between your CEO and your CFO. Some sensitive data, some you know, insider trading, you can make money on data, right? Information is everything. So how do you find out? So, well, the way the configurations are pushed down still in a lot of these environments are using TFTP, right? The most secure protocol from security standpoint. And so all you have to do is just ask the FTP server to get you the list of all contacts, all the users on that VoIP in that VoIP environment. So here's an example. You just ask it for it's a configuration like XML file that has names and extensions for the VoIP users on the network. And then you get that, and that's how you know which phones to go after, right? Because you're attacking the phone in order to get the conversation of the user on that phone. All right, now let's get a little bit to the Cisco Unified Communications Manager specific. So does it have any capabilities to prevent some of these attacks? Well, it does. Number one, you got to remember it's still an application, so to speak, still infrastructure. Somebody's got to log into it. So there's going to be username and password. We're relying on that still. So we see companies and not enabling those credentials policy. By now, everybody has the Windows Active Directory, that's the main user store in the environments, and they use that to make sure that their users have strong username and passwords. Right? A lot of companies will enforce that policy. When you go outside of that, you go into something like a call manager and your supervisors and your agents logging in and listening to the conversations or improvement of quality and other reasons. Then you got to make sure that when they're logging in, somebody can't just log in as them and then listen to all the conversations in your company that's being carried out. So credential policy still comes into play. There's security modes enabled on the devices, and they can be enabled on devices. However, a lot of environments they're not. There's encryption that is to be applied, right? In security, we try to encrypt information. That's one of our ways to make sure that somebody in the middle that's not authorized can read that data. We don't see that being done. And then the configuration information for the phones, right? Because that's an area between your phone and your infrastructure. It's got to be able to communicate and authenticate. And that's not the enrollment process. How do you know that this is the phone? How do you know that this is infrastructure? That's somebody's not spoofing that information. Here's an example of Unified Communications Manager being used, and here's how you configure your credential policy. Right? A lot of times it's just blank, just like how it is here. Now, I mentioned briefly about security mode, and it's pretty clear you can enable or disable it here. It does take quite a bit of overhead. Obviously, you want security, you got to be able to manage it. It's not a lot of times it's not just a switch, but a lot of these vendors make it make it easier for people to actually enable those settings. So here's an example of that, where you can set it to, if you set it to non-secure, obviously you're not taking advantage of those capabilities, and the setup of communications and the data itself is not being protected. And you can actually encrypt the TFTP config files as well. So if somebody does intercept it, or somebody queries that file, they can't make any sense out of the data because it is encrypted. And retrieving registration information from the TFTP servers will have some kind of authentication, some kind of way of knowing that, hey, this is really the phone, this is really the information I want to provide to that phone, and it's not somebody doing it in the middle. Now, there's additional functionality with the Cisco Unified Communications Manager, such as certificate authority proxy function. So it's kind of a functionality where you're able to send out those configuration files and certificates, and but a lot of times we'll see that as part of the implementation, but it will be by null string, which means that's how you're not really encrypting data at all. It's just like having SSL and then using no encryption and not actually taking advantage of that functionality there and just using it for authentication. You can do that, right? You can have TLS or SSL without encryption. But and in this case, we have this functionality. We have that proxy function, and if the authentication is by null string, so all you do is send a null and you're authenticated, then you're not really taking advantage of that. And the problem with this is that because it doesn't require user interaction, then it can be abused. So we've seen it in the wild when you can actually push out rogue provisioning files to the phones, and then actually have them be able to reset their settings and have them talk to a different infrastructure and legitimate infrastructure. So how do you enable this? Just, you can do check for trivial passwords, right? That's kind of their way of ensuring that the passwords are complex. They'll check for dictionary passwords, and it will tell users, hey, you can't use that password because it's too simple. And, you also have your pins, voicemail pins. You can increase the length on those to make it a little bit harder for people to brute force it. Have some kind of monitoring in place if somebody is brute forcing, so you can, address it that way. Same thing that we have in the Windows infrastructure as well. If somebody's trying to guess logins, guess pins, lock them out to slow down the process, investigate it. Nothing really new there. And then you want to make it so that if somebody is locked out an account, locked out a user, then you want it to only be able to be unlocked by an administrator, but somebody who will investigate that issue. On the manager a little bit more, you can enable that encryption security mode, and that it uses TLS, and obviously it's using for integrity, authentication, and encryption, and you can use secure real-time protocol for actually carrying that phone call media across the network. However, it's not all the phones support it, right? Once you might have to upgrade to the latest and greatest in order to take advantage of that functionality, because chances are it's only been available since somebody pushed vendor to be able to offer that functionality. Now, as far as configurations and sending configurations back and forth and configuring devices, that's kind of like your group policy type functionality, where you're able to push out configuration. It's kind of sensitive, kind of important feature of the implementation. So, enabling encryption on that so that somebody can just, download the provisional files off your TFTP servers and use it for legitimate purposes. Now, the phones will come with locally significant security certificate that is embedded there by the vendor, right? So they'll come with a certificate already embedded. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of the fact that you can use that functionality, that type of functionality in order to ensure that somebody can't just add a certificate to their phone without your knowledge. And you can do that by saying, you can enable authentication setting to be by existing certificate. So you're saying, if there's a certificate already existing, then use that certificate to authenticate the phone. Now, as far as, changing that certificate trust list and updating that, there's been some research done, and it was presented at Black Hat Europe 2012, on how that process can be abused. So some of the things that kind of came out of that is when you're doing that initial provisioning, make sure you do it in a secure environment. Right? If there is a part of your process that is impossible or really difficult to secure, then do it in an environment where you have a very, very little opportunity for abuse. Right? So make sure that when you're provisioning phones, do internal network, internal environment, something control, and then you know that it's trusted, right? That somebody wasn't able to temper it at that stage. And when you take it into a less secure environment, you can rely on that more. And that's kind of the benefit here. Okay, now some of the phones, some of the models, some of the latest and greatest will come security by default. So yeah, the vendors identified the fact that even if you offer security and people don't enable it, then you gotta put it in the out of the box, that type of approach. That's what we see as well, to be able to modify that initial trust list. It's is definitely making it more challenging for somebody to do that. Now, as far as so I talked about the implementation itself, infrastructure. Now, what about the phones? Right, because just like the client, you can have the hardest infrastructure in the world, and if your users clicks on the links and get compromised, then the data is at risk. It's the same way with the phones, right? You have the settings access, which is with the phones, obviously, just with anything you have physical access, then that overrides a lot of our controls. So the phones, you're going to have a setting access when you can go in and fiddle with the settings and change them. And that's one of the areas we'll talk about how to secure that. How do you make it so that users can't change the settings that you pushed out for your configuration profile? There's also a way, and we see companies doing that. They only have one jack in the office, and they try to utilize it for both voice and data. So they'll have a PC port on the phone where you can actually connect to the phone. On the back of the phone, you're going to have a jack, I guess. You can connect to that jack and then connect it to the network, and now you have one jack that needs to be on in the office. And there's also PC voice VLAN access, so you can get to the VLAN through the phone, to the voice VLAN through the phone with your laptop or desktop device. And then we'll talk about ARP, right? So address resolution protocol. How do you establish that information of, hey, here's my MAC and here's my IP. When you want to talk to me, that's two pieces of information you need. And a lot of these phones will come with web access. Right? Everybody heard about Internet of Things. Right? These days we have toasters, we have refrigerators, they have web access into the web interface. A lot of the Cisco phones, well, they come with it. You can turn it off. So we'll talk about that as well. All right. So as I mentioned, to be able to override some of the settings, if you have physical access to the phones, this definitely gives you that avenue. And we want to prevent that. So you can actually disable it, just like we have group policy in the Windows environment. We can push out certain security configurations onto our servers, onto our workstations. Same way here, you're able to push out and say, hey, disable the settings access. I don't want my users to change the TFTP server they talk to. But there's a default password, so you want to make sure that you actually change that password on the phone. Now, the phones will come with integrated switch in them, right? So what you want to do is make sure that, and by default that is enabled. PC port on all Cisco phones enabled. So you want to disable it at least in the public areas. At least do it in the lunchrooms, in your FOIA lobby, and conference rooms. And what you find is when the phone first boots up, it won't have the configuration yet. So you have that small window of opportunity when you can actually, you can actually take advantage of the default insecure settings. So make sure you're aware of that. So even if you push out configuration settings to the phone, while it boots up, it doesn't have those secure configurations yet. So there's that small window of attack when that voice VLAN is actually, PC voice VLAN is enabled. And so as I mentioned, the settings come over TFTP. And one of the things that you want to prevent users from doing is overriding the TFTP server, a legitimate TFTP server, so that they can't push settings to the phone that are changed by an attacker, for example, right? So there's a setting within the phone that says, hey, now instead of using the legitimate TFTP server, use this new one, and trust this new one. So we want to prevent that from happening, and so that rogue profiles and configurations can be pushed to the phones. Now, password protecting the phone, like I mentioned before, this is your default password. There is 3 stars and £1. So change the PC port configurations to disabled instead of default configurations of auto negotiated. And here's an example of seeing some of those settings where you actually, I don't know how you can see it really well, but so you can change the setting and allow it to be, it's unlocked setting now, and then you can erase it, and then you can give it your own setting. Okay. So now let's do a quick demo. So for a lot of this, unfortunately, you need to have wired access, but in here we don't. So I just pre-recorded a demo that I'm going to play over here. If I can get to my mouse. Can you see that? Cool. All right, so just a quick demo. So in this demo, I have I have a VoIP phone, and for this demonstration, I'm going to use a cell phone as well. So you don't have to have a hardware phone to do VoIP conversations. You can use a laptop. You can download a lot of freeware VoIP clients out there. In this case, I'm using Xlite, and I'm using a VoIP service to establish that communication. So, and for the tools, nothing fancy, right? People heard of Kane-Enable, right? It's been around for a long time. Definitely a full-featured tool, a lot of functionality, and we're going to use this in this demonstration for ARP poisoning, and carry this out. So so what you do first is obviously you need to identify the devices on your network and identify what devices you want to intercept traffic from, right? So this is part of my YouTube video, so this is where I'm talking. Let me fast forward this part. All right. So now what you do, you enable sniffing, and then you scan for MAC addresses on your local LAN. And here I have a couple of devices that I have my Astra phone and Netgear switch. And now what you want to do is you want to ARP poisoning communication between those devices. So here I go, you select a switch, and then you select the phone you want to intercept communication from, and then you just start that ARP poisoning process. So very simple, just click type tool, and then you make a phone call. So here I'm calling the phone from a cell phone, right? And I'm intersecting communication between the switch and the phone itself. And now this conversation goes on. The call is established. You can see that on top. And here, so in behind the scenes, Kane-Enable is recording conversation, and the conversation is happening as we see. And as far as the users, they don't see any difference, right? The conversation is just fine, and there's no indication, right? And then you just go under VoIP tab here on Kane-Enable, and it tells you where it's recording right now, and then gives you a status there on the end. And when it's converted the codec, then you just go ahead and play it, right? And you play it over here. So I have it, an example of that, so you know what it sounds like. That's the file.
Thank you for the letter security days. Can I help you?
Hello, yes, I am interested to learn some.
All right. So you can tell that you're able to. All right. So this is a conversation between two individuals, and you can hear both of them talk in the recording, and you can actually, see the information going back and forth. So nothing complicated, right? Nothing complex, and in this case, you're able to take advantage of that. Okay. So in this case, what we're going to actually cover now is how do we deal with this concerns that we may have, right? How do you address this, and how do we make sure that these risks are not exposing our enterprise, exposing our environments? First thing is to be aware of the risks. Know what is being exposed. Know what is allowing the people to get access to that information, right? So, and don't make any assumptions about security enforced by the vendors, and prevent that from happening. And in case of the environment that we're describing here, it's for Cisco Unified Communications Manager, there are settings there. Take advantage of them. Make sure that you understand what they do. Make sure you understand how they impact your production environment, and understand it from that standpoint. And in order to know how secure your environment, test it. Look under the hood. A lot of times we'll find that we just assume that it's secure, and I tell our customers, unless somebody has a reason to identify those issues, you really wouldn't know, right? Because security is a quality factor of anything, right? And it's a quality that is it's either there, or to be able to achieve that quality, you need to spend resources, spend time on it. So it definitely requires attention. Now, as far as the slides are on our website, security.com, with the resource and presentations. You can download the slides, and here's my contact information. If you want to contact me, my email, my Twitter handle, or you can reach out if you have any questions about this content. Any questions? We got a couple of minutes. Any questions on this content? Buzz PC voice. Yeah, you're talking about the when you first boot up a phone. So what happens is your phone is pretty much a dumb device, right? So it doesn't have configurations until they push to it. So when you first plug in the phone, while it boots up, it has default configurations, which will allow things like, your PC VLAN is still enabled. So while it's booting up, it's already on the network and it can communicate, but it hasn't received that configuration file yet. So somebody's trying to harden their phones and they push very secure configuration files to it. If you have physical access to the phone and you plug in to the back of the phone, while the phone is booting up and while the phone is waiting for that configuration file to come in, you can actually talk to the phone, because by default that PC VLAN is enabled. So that's what I was referring to. Even if administrators say, hey, we got configurations on all our phones, make them aware that if somebody has physical access to the phone, they can still take advantage of default configurations before the secure configuration is pushed onto it. That's kind of what I was referring to there. Okay, any other questions? Go ahead.
What were the names of the programs that you used to get?
Yeah, so it's CAN-enable is the tool for interception of traffic, and it has default decoding of your data into playable format, MP3, I believe. And so CAN-enable is a tool that you can use. There's other EtherCap and other tools that can accomplish the same thing.
What about the ARP?
Yeah, so CAN-enable did pretty much everything. So it did the ARP poisoning, it did decoding of conversation. It's kind of all in one. You can also, you can just accomplish ARP poisoning with another tool, and then you can just figure out how to do decoding. You can use, Wireshark will do that for you as well, where it's able to decode, your stream into a playable audio file. So, you can use other tools to do ARP poisoning, and then you just need to know which one are your targets. Any other questions? Okay, I think we're up on time. Thank you for your attention.